Good day, I'm Administrator Adam Southgate, and today we will be summarizing the events that took place during the Iron Dawn event. But before I get ahead of myself, I'd like to mention the Order's Discord to help keep our hunters organized. It's broken up into different roles based on rank and which oath you belong to, if any. Along with this, we conduct our contracts through this system, so I hope to see you all there. Now, onto the recap. To start, the Iron Dawn was a splinter faction of the Iron Cult, and were endeavouring to create an avatar of their proto-god. They had successfully constructed the base of the being, a woman they had implanted with countless of their own artifacts, and only needed to empower this being through ritual. This could not be allowed to happen, though thankfully we had a chance. Each god entity can only ever have one avatar being that acts as their herald, wielding anomalous abilities that run parallel to their god's strength. In this case, the avatar would have been capable of direct control of metal, even being able to bring it to life, and this would have been on the lower end, as the Iron God is even now still within the proto stage, not achieving full godhood. Their aim in creating this being was to inspire worship in the Iron God more rapidly, hastening its ascension. But as I was saying, the avatar itself was not yet fully empowered, and so it could be killed before the critical point was reached. If it had reached this point, while it could technically still have been killed, it would have resurrected as a newborn somewhere within the world with all its memories and abilities intact. With each god being only ever being able to have one avatar within our world, if we were to kill them before they were fully empowered, they would not be able to resurrect, and the Iron God would never be able to have an avatar again. Now that the setup is out of the way, we can get on to the event itself. We discovered that the Iron Dawn had consolidated their power and the avatar herself beneath the town of Barry, within a complex they had dug out using anomalous means. We were planning to assault this base through the various entrances, fighting our way down towards the avatar. However, the Iron Dawn, most likely due to a small group of our hunters who had become indoctrinated during a previous infiltration, learned of this. While we were prepping for the attack, the Iron Dawn began rushing to the surface and had begun grabbing civilians for some unknown purpose. Each of their number were enhanced with their typical iron implants roughly rammed into their body, increasing their strength and durability. They also wielded a variety of weaponry to devastating effect. When we were ready to move, the Iron Dawn was still moving from building to building, grabbing civilians and moving them to 3 different assembly locations, we assume either to indoctrinate them into the cult or to use them to empower their avatar. The hunters were left with a very difficult decision, either aid the civilians or rush underground to deal with the avatar. Fifth, the Opportunist argued for the more pragmatic approach of leaving the civilians to more quickly deal with the avatar before its ascension. His main thought being that if the avatar were to ascend before they actually reached her, it would all be over, so the needs of the many and all that. However, the hunters as a whole fell on the side of rescuing those being rounded up by the Iron Dawn. The main bulk of the hunters broke up into 3 distinct teams to attack the assembly points where the civilians had been taken to, while the Slumbering Sanctuary and his team went out in an attempt to disrupt the active capture of these civilians. The beginning of the assault went well at all 3 locations, the hunters surprising the Iron Dawn members with rapid strikes. However, it did not take long for them to construct a defense, slowing down the fight. The first group of hunters assaulted Jenner Park Stadium Assembly Point. The civilians had been gathered onto the pitch itself, where the Iron Dawn had set up a strange iron pillar at the center. While the hunters fought off many Iron Dawn in the stands, down on the pitch the odd pillar came to life with the sounds of several diesel engines. Blades as long as 2 men are tall extended from the construction as it began to spin rapidly, the blades themselves disappearing into a blur. On the outside of the crowd of civilians, the Iron Dawn, not actively fighting the hunters, began pressing in, forcing the mundane people into the blades. The spinning column became a tornado of blood, with dim lines of light as the blades themselves began to heat with each new person added. Thankfully, Fifth Opportunist, who was fighting in the stands, noticed this just in time and instructed half the hunters to disengage in the stands and instead focus on breaking the ring of cultists around the civilians, opening up a path of escape. Terrified people quickly broke for the exits, while the hunters themselves finished off the Iron Dawn members. The second group, led by that one guy, faced a similar situation. However, here the machine was instead two large plates attached to multiple hydraulic systems, creating a gigantic press. By the time the team arrived, several people had already been sacrificed within the machine, the two plates covered in gore and glowing malevolently. Thankfully, due to how the machine worked, the cultists had been holding the larger group of civilians in one area, then pulling out a smaller group and forcing them into the machine, so while under attack by the hunters, the Iron Dawn members were unable to keep control of their captives. As the first shot rang out, fired by that one guy into the head of the Iron Dawn member who seemed to be in charge of this group, the civilians scattered in all directions, the Iron Dawn too busy fighting to stop them. The final point was at Whitmore Bay, where again a machine had been constructed, this time two large rollers positioned vertically with an inch between them, spinning at a high velocity. The hunters witnessed as a luckless civilian was thrown between the two constructs, being torn to mulch in an instant and fired out into the sea beyond, and again the pillars were glowing with a soft, warm light. The fight was bloody but brief, and thankfully the majority of the civilians managed to escape back into the town. Meanwhile, the Slumbering Sanctuary and his team set about hunting down the various Iron Dawn capture teams still roaming through Barry. While Myko and the Slumbering Sanctuary had a difficult go of it, being Fey hybrids, as the Iron Cult were formed to directly combat the Fey sphere, and so their magic was mostly ineffective, Sam, being entropically infused, had no such issue. The team quickly worked out a strategy where Myko and the Slumbering Sanctuary would attempt to hold down the Iron Dawn with standard gunfire, neither of their specialty. Then Sam, with his anomalously infused weapon, would take the killing shot. The plan was working well until the team noted a sudden change in the Iron Dawn's behaviour. Instead of moving captured civilians to the assembly points, they were now ushering them underground. But this also exposed entrances to their complex that were previously unknown. This left the hunters with a decision to be made. They could all go down one singular entrance to attempt to overwhelm the enemy forces. They could enter through separate entrances to divert the enemy's attention in different directions. Lastly, the idea was floated of simply making a completely new entrance to take the Iron Dawn off guard. Though the decision was divided, ultimately the hunters landed upon the idea of creating their own entrance to the underground complex. A large industrial machine designed to create deep boreholes for oil drilling was brought in to begin the process. Thankfully, anticipating this eventuality, the Order had kept one on standby in case the Iron Dawn decided to seal the already existing entrances. It took some hours to set up the machine, it then drilling a 30-inch wide hole down into the earth. Once this was achieved, and after some back and forth with the UK government, an explosive device was lowered within. Once all personnel had retreated to a safe distance, the charges were triggered, sending tons of earth high into the air. The explosion created an impressive crater, and at the bottom of said crater, a small, roughly 1 meter wide hole leading into the complex. Acting fast to take advantage of the chaos, the hunters quickly set up a winch system to begin lowering themselves inside. After the first group reached the bottom, they quickly took stock of their surroundings, a large metal room filled with industrial-looking machinery still hammering away, and a large number of iron casket-like objects of varying sizes. All the while, the air was difficult to breathe, filled with pollutants. The sounds in the room were deafening, a whining siren pulsing in distress, the hammer of metal against metal, and coming from somewhere close, the wails of the desperate. Before the second group could reach the ground, the caskets began to shake in time with the siren until, synchronized, a large metallic clunk could be heard from each of them and one side fell away. The havoc that followed was brutal as monstrosities of varying sizes with almost random iron augmentations began tearing at any they could. One hunter, before being able to react to what was happening, had 3 sharpened metal stakes rammed through the back of his torso, protruding from the front as he was lifted from his feet and smashed into the ground time and time again. Amproburb official, reacting just in time, narrowly avoided being bisected by a large sweeping cut from one of the mutilated people that had become a monster. Diving low under the arc of the blade, Amproburb official fired a solid tungsten slug at the center mass of the being, hoping to hit something vital. However, the being only roared out in pain, slashing down in a vertical arc at the hunter. Rolling at the last second while pumping his shotgun, Amproburb official fired again, this time aiming for the head. The slug hit cleanly between what was once where the eyes would have been, creating a canyon through the head, causing it to fall backwards limply. Sam, a member of the Slumbering Sanctuary's 3-person team, fired shot after shot into the rusted hulks around him, attempting to maintain his distance. However, one of the entities, noticing the revolver-wielding menace, took offense. It smashed its way through the still-running machinery, sending blades of iron shrapnel around the room. Sam, after firing 2 rounds into the creature, heard his gun click as it approached. He quickly tried to reload the weapon, but before he could even empty the spent cartridges, a fist of fused metal was screaming through the air towards his head in a downward arc. The Slumbering Sanctuary and Maiko, reacting with anomalous speed and strength, raised their blades, crossed over each other, catching the fist within the top of the X the two made. Even with the spells the two had used to enhance themselves, both felt as their knees and elbows threatened to break under the impact, but just in time Sam slammed a single round into the chamber, raised his weapon and fired into the monstrosity. It fell back, slamming into the ground with earth-shaking force. As Blue Beetle's feet hit the ground, a metallic beast that was once several men attempted to run clean through him. Just before contact with the countless razors attached to the being's head, he leapt upwards, grabbing the descent rope with both hands and hauling himself up above it as it passed millimeters beneath him. Blue Beetle fell back to the ground roughly, staggering to one side while the entity readied another charge. Not having time to draw his own weapon, he quickly grabbed what looked like a suspension arm from a nearby conveyor belt. As the being thundered towards him yet again, he artfully sidestepped the creature, bringing the hunk of iron down heavily upon its head, a satisfying metallic and wet squelch signaling the creature's end. Fifth the Opportunist, being one of the first to reach the ground, had been separated from the other hunters, being cut off on one side of the large room. The entities chasing him were covered in thick iron plates rammed under the skin, crusted lines of dried blood showing the trauma of the procedure. No matter how many rounds Fithy fired into the being, none would break through the plating, and all the while, with hands with axes where fingers should have been, the creature kept swiping towards him. Backed into a corner with no escape, Fithy drew 2 odd-looking blades, impossibly thin abomination chitin with what appeared to be human bone acting as the handles and the spine of the blades. As the creature made another clumsy swipe, Fithy swung the 2 blades, intersecting with the being's wrist, cleanly severing the hand from the rest of the body. Taking advantage of the creature's confusion, he quickly and indiscriminately began slicing into the being's torso, cutting whole chunks away from the body until finally it gave out and died. That one guy, still descending during all the chaos, took advantage of his position and swung through the air, landing atop one of the entities that had been built to move on all fours. As the entity panicked at the sudden presence on its back, it began throwing itself around the room. That one guy, thinking quickly, used a rope and an improvised hook to attach himself to the top of the being while remaining in a standing position. As the creature tore through the machinery in the room, that one guy fired shot after shot into the back of the being, trying to bring it down. After 8 rounds, little progress had been made. However, a distinctive hole was being created between the being's shoulder blades. Deciding to take a chance, that one guy pulled out a small bag of thermite and rammed it into the hole on the entity's back, lighting the bag and leaping to safety. The result was not an explosion, but a slow burn as the thermite quickly rose to incredible temperatures and burned a hole clean through the being, bringing it down. With the mayhem over, at least for now, the hunters took stock of their environment. The now wreck of a room they were in had 2 doors. One led to, seemingly, the rest of the complex and to where the proto-avatar being was stored, while the other was another large room filled with cages. Within the cages were civilians of various ages and in different states of being implanted. However, all were desperately pleading for rescue. With the immediate area secured, the hunters decided to finish entering the facility, then split into 2 teams. The first would remain at the entry site, defending the area and assisting the extraction of the captured civilians, while the second would head deeper into the facility. It was in the quiet of prepping to head further in when the sound was first noticed. A beating drum with the cadence of a human heart. It was incredibly faint, which is why no one questioned why the radios couldn't pick it up. It was only after Hunter, the opportunist, tried to verbalize the sound to the staff on the other side of the radio that the truth came to light. After Fithy's rendition, that one guy interjected, stating that the beat was too fast. This is how the hunters learned that each of them were hearing the sound at a different speed. Checking the sound with a parabolic microphone, it was quickly discovered that the sound itself only existed in the minds of those within the underground complex, and it was slowly quickening for each of them. The second team, heading deeper into the complex, moved out of the factory room they had breached into and walked, weapons raised, into the adjoining corridor. The corridor itself was completely lined with metals of all kinds, seams running in all directions between rough-cut plates that had been welded together. There was a light incline to the hallway, however the slumbering sanctuary, feeling something was wrong, placed a simple can upon the ground and all watched as it rolled up the hill, an affront to basic logic, coming to a stop at the top of the incline. The sounds of distorted chanting mixed with grinding metal could be heard coming from the end of the hallway, where the hunters would need to head. With the sounds of chanting coming from the room at the end of the illogical hallway, the hunters charged forth, weapons raised and ready to fire. What they were met with, however, defied expectation. Not cultists praying around a twisted altar, but rather people turned to metal and fused into the walls, horrified grimaces carved into each of their faces as they impossibly writhed, while words not their own came from their mouths. The victims turned into living decor were a mix of civilians and Old Guard members, and each, while forced to recite words they desperately did not wish to speak, had a deep pleading on their sightless, etched-in eyes. Within the center of the room sat a large chunk of unrefined metal, softly glowing hot, the light slowly growing in intensity. Beneath the hunk of iron etched into the metallic floor were runes of the Iron Cult, which shone with a light that matched that of the boulder sat atop it, most likely sending energy to some unknown place. On the other side of the room, the people-turned metallic animate statues blocked the exit to the rest of the complex, their arms fused together to bar the hunters' way. That one guy, drawing a knife from his boot, kneeled down over the ritual circle, the runes lighting the bottom of his face, casting the rest in an eerie shadow. A smile cracked onto his face as he said, "Let's mess with their magic, see what happens," and he plunged the knife into the metal floor, disrupting the circle before anyone else could react. What happened next was difficult to describe. The rock at the center of the room began to glow with even more intensity, as if the energy it was sending to some unknown place was being, for a time, ripped back. The light quickly grew to be blinding, the hunters turning away to cover their eyes. The room itself began to shake violently, threatening to bring down the tons of earth above the hunters until so quickly no one was sure when it happened, it all stopped. As the hunters turned back to see what had happened, they found that the metal rock had crumbled and the metal people trapped within the walls had stopped chanting. It was slow at first, the sound of metal scraping against metal, but quickly grew in speed as the people who had been robbed of their flesh slid out of the walls. There were so many of them there was nowhere to move, but all of them just stood there, full moving metallic statues of people, and then the reality of their situation set in. They screamed, clawed at their eyes and ears. They could not see, they could not hear, they could not feel. They tried to call out for help, but their lungs, moving iron chambers, were not suited to purpose. It was only when an unfamiliar voice came over the radio that hope was offered.
Hello. Sorry I'm not used to this sort of thing. I've tried to avoid anything to do with field work since, well, never mind,
said Dr. Pinocchio.
Listen, if what I think has happened to them has, I may be able to help them. Thanks to my efforts, we have made great strides in the field of prosthetics, specifically the anomalous kind.
A short silence over the radio.
They need to understand to make an informed decision. Apologies, I've been working for some time to link wisp crystals to metal equipment so we could make more durable prosthetics. The project was mostly a failure, but that was only because the living flesh bypass wouldn't be thick enough to work. But for them it would be possible to rig something up. I know you have a lot going on right now, but you need to get them out of there, please.
He finished, his voice synthesized like his body through a wisp crystal. With the poor, blind, deaf and sensationless wretches being guided to the surface by half the hunters, the others carried on into the echoing darkness of unforgiving steel. The wider complex was a shifting labyrinth of tunnels that seemed to warp and twist around them as they proceeded on, the reality of this place seeming to come apart at the seams. Human organs made of steel would suddenly manifest within the walls, pulsing with a sickly life, then being resorbed into the metal they were spawned from. All the while, the heartbeat grew stronger within the hunters' minds, each beat stripping their resolve. Many hunters had fallen to their knees, not possessing the will to place one foot in front of the other, while MMBs overloaded and shattered to dust within their boxes. Those still on their feet questioned the point of this futility, for what is a man in the face of a god? Each could feel as nails of iron pierced their flesh, draining their strength. Why continue when it would be so much easier to lay down? Just lay down, just lay down, just lay down. Years, decades, centuries, millennia, no one could say how long they wandered the twisting halls of that metallic hell as the heartbeat that had infected their minds grew louder and faster, but still, each could hear the voice. Just lay down, just lay down, just lay down. It began commanding and authoritative, but as time grinded onwards, it grew desperate and pleading. Just lay down, just lay down, just lay down. As the hunters pushed against a relentless urging, the warped reality around them began to fray, being stretched to its limits until with a crack that could be felt in their spirit, actuality reasserted itself. Hunters, are you there? We lost contact for a moment. Do you have eyes on the target? Crackled the voice of Administrator Adam Southgate. As the hunters looked around, they could still feel the intruding heartbeat, though quieter now, as if placed within a small corner of their minds. They stood within a grand room, far below where they were when they saved the metal people. Pillars stretching far above held the earth at bay, the ceiling a curved arch room designed to force awe on all who beheld it. Within the center of the great hall were hundreds of Iron Dawn members, each holding their eyes in their hands while resting on their knees. They muttered in a voice that alone would be too quiet to hear, however in chorus was a stable and stern chant. All were facing the very center, a column of glass filled with an oily liquid, and floating within that liquid, huddled in the fetal position, a woman, her head resting against her own knees as if sobbing to herself. Looking closer at the glass, thin scratches could be seen on the inside, as if she had been attempting to escape what had been done to her, but had given up, falling into a deep despair. That's her. That's the target. I trust all of your judgment on how to proceed. At the urging of the slumbering sanctuary and that one guy, the hunters decided to drain the tank containing the proto-avatar instead of firing into it in an attempt to save the woman. Looking at the scratches on the inside of the tank, the hunters believed that in all likelihood the woman was an unwilling participant in this process and therefore innocent. On the left side of the tank was a solid chunk of iron that acted as a lever. It took 3 hunters to get the thing moving, but eventually, with the crack of rust, the thing finally budged. The sound of running liquid could be heard throughout the chamber as the oil began to slowly drain. The Iron Dawn members, who up until now had been gibbering their prayers to the Iron God while holding their removed eyes in their hands, reacted immediately to the sound, moving both eyes to their left hand and picking up weapons in their right. Through anomalous means, the cultists moved as if they could see the hunters throwing themselves at them, swinging axes, swords, and daggers with deadly precision. That one guy, being charged by 2 of the eyeless maniacs, managed at the last second to sidestep a wide downward arc of a rust-covered axe, raising his rifle so the barrel was touching the head of the attacker and pulling the trigger. As the first began to fall limply to the ground, the second rushed forward, dagger outstretched. That one guy went to dodge, however the cultist's head was turned away, facing the opposite direction, making it difficult to judge which way he was going to strike. Mistiming his movements, that one guy and the cultist collided, but at the last second he managed to raise his rifle horizontally to block the stab, with the 2 of them falling to the floor with the cultist on top. Scrabbling desperately, that one guy holding the rifle butt in one hand, the barrel pressing into the ground on his other side, reached down with his free hand, finding his own dagger, thrusting it up into the bottom of the cultist's head with a satisfying wet thunk. Blue Beetle, seeing the chaos unfold as 3 cultists charged towards him, quickly turned and climbed atop the slowly draining tank, drawing his own double-barrel shotgun. By the time he'd got it ready, 2 of his attackers were already climbing up to his position, their heads above the rim of the tank. Blue Beetle leveled his weapon and fired, raining pieces of skull and brain matter over the battlefield, but before he could ready the next shot, one of the cultists was high enough to swing its weapon, while the third was quickly reaching his position. Blue Beetle leapt from the top of the tank, falling into a rough roll after hitting the ground. From his prone position, he leveled the shotgun and fired the final chambered slug. It flew through the air and into the back of the head of the cultist still climbing, passing straight through and then continuing into the front of the head of the cultist who had forced him to jump. Fifi, pursued by 5 of the eyeless Iron Dawn, had become surrounded, his back against one of the impossibly large pillars. 3 went in to slice at the hunter, Fifi darting between 2 while cutting through the third with his abomination chitin blades. He wanted to give himself some breathing room, however the 2 that had not charged earlier were already on him, a rough sword and axe already arcing towards him. Panicking at the sudden assault, Fifi cut out with his 2 blades, severing the hand of one of the attackers, then spinning himself around the now one-handed man and pushing him into the other. The 2 cultists fell heavily to the floor, and Fifi, taking advantage, ran one of his 2 blades downward through the first man and into the second. However, before he could gain the leverage to pull his blade free, the final 2 were upon him. Reaching down with his now free hand, Fifi grabbed his sidearm just in time as an axe was raised above him, ready to come down brutally. Fifi fired into the head of the axe-wielding cultist just as they finished raising the weapon, causing them to fall backwards with the momentum of the axe. The final cultist, stabbing forward wildly with a dagger, was surprised when Fifi blocked and diverted the attack to the side with his pistol, bringing his sword up and through the cultist's torso. For the slumbering sanctuary and his team, the fight was more a process of exponential growth. Both Maiko and the slumbering sanctuary focused on taking down cultists with their swords, fighting back to back as more and more cultists threw themselves towards them. Each enhanced their physical abilities with their own anomalous means, moving faster than the cultists. However, in this place of iron and steel, the ability was heavily draining and the 2 would not be able to keep it up for long. However, what would be a doomed strategy was in fact augmented by their 3rd member, Sam, an entropically infused individual. For each cultist the two took down, Sam was hurriedly ramming his own modified entropic entities into the bodies, turning the dead into allies. By the time Maiko and the slumbering sanctuary fell to the ground, drained and exhausted, the three were guarded by multiple reanimated corpses under Sam's control. Amproburb official, during the carnage happening all around, noticed just in time the three cultists attempting to push the lever back into position. Having no time to reload, he rushed forward, grabbing the maul of a dead hunter as he went. He swung the weapon in a wide arc towards the three, connecting with one heavily and skewering them onto the lever itself. The other two, having only just missed meeting the same fate, stepped back, drawing their own weapons. Amproburb official, realizing that the unfamiliar weapon would be too slow, instead threw it towards the closest hunter, it connecting with the man's knee with a pained crunch. As the second charged forward, Amproburb official ducked to the side, swiping a cultist dagger from a corpse and bringing it up in a wide arc into the man's torso. The final cultist, laying on the ground with a shattered knee, was quickly put down with a stomp to the head. The battle continued for a while longer with losses on both sides. However, the hunters won out, felling the last of them as the tank finished draining. Seeing no simple means of opening the device, the hunters opted for simply smashing it, the woman laying shivering, unconscious and covered in glass. As the hunters moved her from the center of the tank, the entire hall began to scream, the spot acting as the focal point of the Iron Dawn's ritual. The entire complex began to shake and rumble in protest to the incomplete ascension, and then the sound of rushing, roaring water began. The town of Barry was coastal, and while the complex was structurally sound, it appeared as if the cult had set in place a contingency. The hunters ran as the water howled behind them. Upon the surface, the beach became uncovered as the sea drained below the earth. Maiko and the slumbering sanctuary, though exhausted and needing to be carried themselves, used their abilities to collapse the tunnels behind them to slow the encroaching sea. By the time the hunters reached the entry point, the two were unconscious and deathly pale. It was too close, but all surviving hunters managed to extract from the complex along with the proto-avatar. Upon the surface, the hunters saw all they had saved: the civilians who had been hunted through the streets, the test subjects filled with painful iron implants, the metal people still panicking at their lack of sensation, and of course the woman filled with her own implants, still unconscious but radiating power. It's going to take some time to straighten out what all of this means, and each group of survivors will need their own solutions going forward. The Order will do everything in its power to aid those affected by this incident, while also delving into what, if any, life may be possible for the Proto-Avatar after what has been done to her. Sadly, this whole affair has only affected the Iron Cult within Wales, and soon those of other nations will rush in to fill the power vacuum, but all of you stopped an end-of-the-world scenario, and each of you should be proud. After speaking to several Master Hunters, it has been decided that those journeymen who participated in this contract can put it forward as their own masterwork, where it will be considered. But that will be all. Please like, comment and subscribe. With Arthur's might and Merlin's wisdom, thank you.